Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about multiplying radicals. So specifically we're going to look at problems that look something like this. So just as a reminder, remember, pause the videos and try the examples when prompted, and there are always free guided notes available. So before we get started, I think it's best just to state here that there are a few things you need to know how to do so that you can actually do this whole lesson. So this is a little bit of a warm-up here. Pause the video and just make sure you're good with these. So for this first one, so this is just simplifying a radical. So I need to take the cube root. So the stuff that I can simplify in this, if I factor out 8x to the 6th and y to the 9th, I can simplify that. The factors that I would not be able to would be 2x squared and y squared. So if I just simplify this, this is going to be 2x squared y to the 3rd times the cube root of 2x squared y squared. And then for this next one, so once again I have to simplify here, and then I have to combine like radicals. So if I do this, so with the first one, so I can simplify 4x to the 6th. I cannot simplify 6. And then for this second part, so this is 3x cubed, so then I can simplify 25, but I cannot simplify 6. So here's me simplifying the first one right here, and then this is me simplifying the second part here. So if I simplify all of this, this is 2x to the 3rd times the square root of 6 minus 3x cubed times 5, not equals, times the square root of 6, sorry. And so then when you multiply those together, so I'm running out of room here, but I'll go ahead and write this out. So this is 2x cubed times 6 minus 15x cubed times the square root of 6. And so then if you just combine those, you ultimately get negative 13x cubed times the square root of 6. So simplifying radicals and combining like radicals, this should be something you are comfortable with before you start this. Two other things I just want to brush up on real quick. So I want you to hit pause, so go ahead and multiply this out and multiply this together and hit play when you're ready. So just as a quick reminder, so again, this is actually going to really set us up to make this lesson a lot simpler. So you have to, whenever you square something, so you can't just square this and square that. It's not 4x squared minus 25. You actually have to write this out all the way. And so then this will give you 4x squared minus 10x plus 25. So this equals 4x squared minus 20x plus 25. And then for this last part, so just what happens when you multiply two radicals together? Well, since they have the same index, you can just do the 3 times the 5, and so this gives you the cube root of 15, and you can't simplify that any farther. Okay, so just to brush up on all those skills, that's really going to help us with what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I want to talk about is just so what to do when you're multiplying by like distributing or something. So this works exactly how you'd probably think. If I didn't make this video, you'd probably already kind of have a guess on this. So you'll go ahead and you'll just multiply this part, this 5 to both. Now notice this 5 is not under a square root, so you cannot multiply it inside the square root. If it's not under a square root, it just has to stay on the outside. So this first one, this is going to equal 5 times the square root of 3. But for the next part, I can do the 5 times the 2. So this will be minus 10 times the square root of 7. Okay, so I want to contrast that to this other example. So now I do have the square root of 5, so I can totally multiply this number now against these two radicals. So as I distribute in, 5 times the square root of 3, 5 times the square root of 3, that's going to be the square root of 15. And then 5 times the square root of 10, well, that's going to be the square root of 50. Now there's a plot twist here. Notice with the square root of 50, I can actually simplify this. So this will be the square root of 15 minus 5 times the square root of 2. And that's because, so just a quick note on that, so the square root of 50, so that's really the square root of 25. It's a terrible looking 5, sorry. The square root of 25 times the square root of 2. And the square root of 25 is 5. So this would be how you would actually simplify all of this. Now, just a really quick note, something that you'll notice with square roots. If you think about just the factors of 10, so this is just a way to kind of help you think through this a little quicker. The factors of 10 are the square root of 5 and the square root of 2. So this will also make up 10. For square roots only, if you multiply the square root times itself, that will actually cancel out the root. So if I take the square root of 5 times the square root of 5, that already tells me that the 5 is going to end up on the outside. So this is a kind of a quick trick to kind of help you think through this. If that seems confusing to you, don't worry about it. You can just multiply in the way I just showed you. Okay, so to get this party started, I figured I would give you some of these to try. So you can practice that technique I just talked about if you'd like. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so starting with this first one, so if I go kind of the long way, and I just multiply that square root in, so this will give me, so 2 times 6 is 12, and then 2 times 10 is 20. So there I've got this. I can simplify both of these, right? So the square root of 12, this will simplify as 2 times the square root of 3, and the square root of 20 will simplify as 2 times the square root of 5. So that's one way of doing that. Now, one more time, I'm just going to show you real quick how you could think about this in another way. So as I multiply this together, so I've got the square root of 2. So the square root of 6 is really 2 times 3, right? The root 2 minus root 3. And then for the square root of 10, that's the square root of 2 times the square root of 5. So just as you think about distributing this, so when this square root hits this square root, that's what's actually telling you that this will be 2 times the square root of 3, and you don't actually have to multiply it in if you don't want. And the same thing happens here. If I do this times this, so again, I have the same root hitting itself, square root, so this will be 2 times the square root of 5. So this is a shortcut, but this only works with square roots. So it's something you can think about if you'd like. Okay, so I'm going to continue to do the rest of these with that longer method just to be, I guess, clear. But if you tried this with the shorter method, more power to you. So for this first one, so I get the square root of 45 minus the square root of 9y squared. Both of these can be simplified. So this is really the square root of 9 times the square root of 5. And then this whole square root here, I can just simplify this as is. So this is 3y. So my final answer is 3 times the square root of 5 minus 3y. Now, if trying to simplify these, if this is very difficult for you, I do have in the comments section, you will see that I've posted a link to another video. This is, again, something you really have to be comfortable with before you start this. Okay, so now I've got cube roots here. So this is going to give me the cube root of 27 minus the cube root of 9. Okay. So the only cube root that I can actually evaluate here will be 27. So the cube root of 27 is 3. So this is just 3 minus the cube root of 9. So make sure you're keeping your square roots and your cube roots and your fourth roots and all that. Keep them separate and think through that. Okay, so moving on. So this one's going to be the cube root of 12 minus the cube root of 24. So I can simplify this, right? So I can't do anything with the cube root of 12. But for the cube root of 24, I can pull out the 8. So this will ultimately give me the cube root of 12 minus 2 times the cube root of 3. And that's all you can do for that one. Now for this next one, so still working with cube roots. So this becomes the cube root of 2x cubed minus the cube root of 8x to the 4th y to the 5th, and I can simplify both of these, right? So for this first one, so I can only simplify the cube root of x cubed, so this will simplify to x times the cube root of 2. And then this one, so if I want to just break out what I can actually simplify versus what I can't, this is going to be 8x to the 3rd, y to the 3rd, but I'm still going to have a leftover factor of x and y squared. So I ultimately get that this is 2xy times the cube root of xy squared. And here's the final answer right here. Okay, so moving on. Now let's talk about multiplying kind of larger expressions like this. So you might remember a phrase to remember this. A lot of people think of the word FOIL for this. I tend to just think of it as multiply everything in here by multiplying everything in here. And if you're rusty on this, I'll just do a quick overview. So let me see if I can move this. Yeah, I can move this down here. Okay, so this will help me a little bit with my explanation. So first you're going to multiply the first terms. So square root of 2 times square root of 5, that's the square root of 10. Then we'll do the last terms. So square root of 2 times square root of 7 is square root of 14. Then I've got the square root of 3 times the square root of 5, so this will be minus the square root of 15. Make sure you don't lose that negative sign. And then the square root of 3 times the square root of 7, so this is minus the square root of 21. Now, with this one, I can't simplify anything any farther, so I'm actually done. But sometimes you will be able to simplify, so that's something that you just want to look out for. So if you feel good with that, go ahead and pause and hit play when you're ready to try these. Okay, so if I multiply everything together, so I get the square root of 4 plus the square root of 10 plus the square root of 6 plus the square root of 15. Now, notice that when you did the square root of 2 times itself, so you get the square root of 4, but you could also just think of this, again, this only works with square roots, so you have to make sure you remember that, but square root times itself will just end up with, just the number that you see. So I can make this simplification. I can't really simplify anything else in this case. Okay, moving on to the next one. So this is going to give me the square root of 20 minus 3 times the square root of 4 plus the square root of 50 minus 3 times the square root of 10. So I can do quite a few simplifications. I can simplify this, this, and this. So the square root of 20, that will simplify as, so maybe I'll write this out. This is the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. This will be 3 times 2. This will be 25 times the square root of 2. And then I can't do anything with this. So my final answer is going to be 2 times the square root of 5 minus 6 plus 5 times the square root of 2 minus 3 times the square root of 10. And that's it for that one. Okay, so now moving on to this one. So now you just have to keep it straight, right, when you're multiplying roots together versus numbers on the outside. So you just have to make sure you're keeping that straight. So if I just start by multiplying this together, so I get 7 times the square root of 18 plus 2 times the square root of 45 minus 7 times the square root of 30 minus 2 times the square root of 75. And now if I make some simplifications, so the square root of 18, so this is going to really be 9 times 2. So if I take this is the square root of 9 times 2. This next one, so this is 9 times 5. I can't simplify the square root of 30, but I can simplify the square root of 75. So there's how I can break all of those down. So I'm left with 7 times 3 times the square root of 2 plus 2 times 3 times the square root of 5 minus 7 times the square root of 30. Oops, I'm sorry, this should have been 25, not 5. I was thinking of evaluating the square root. This will be 2 times 5 times the square root of 3. So now I get 21 times the square root of 2 plus 6, not 15, 6 times the square root of 5 minus 7 times the square root of 30 minus 10 times the square root of 3. And I have no like radicals here, so I can't go any farther with this. And now for this last one. So first let me just multiply all these pieces together. Okay, so here's what happens when I just multiply all those pieces together. So now let me break these down. I'll show you how to simplify them. Okay, and now I'll show you the next step. And so now I'll multiply these together to get the final answer. And so there you go. So now let's move on to the next one. So this is why I did that review question. So you just have to remember with problems like this that you are going to have to write these out as the square root of 5 plus 10 times the square root of 5 plus the square root of 10. So like this. And so this is also why thinking through that shortcut I showed you with square roots, why that's really helpful. So if I go through and I multiply this together, so I've got the square root of 5 times the square root of 5. So I know that that's the square root of 25, but rather than writing that all out, I do know, right, that that's just going to end up as 5. So you can think of it that way. And then if I take the square root of 5 times the square root of 10, well, I know that 10 has a factor of 5. So I could either write out that this is going to be the square root of 50. Sorry, my 5s are having trouble making 5s today. So I could either write that out as the square root of 50, or I could just say, oh, I know that that's going to have a 5 that I can kind of break out, and then I'll still have that leftover factor of 2. And then as I continue down, so then I'll have another square root of 50, or again, I can think through this as the square root of 5 times the square root of 2. And then I could say, well, this is either the square root of 100, or because I'm taking the square root times itself, this will just be plus 10. So you might want to practice this if you haven't been. I think this can be a really nice method to use, and then you have to just combine whatever like terms, like radicals that you can. So here the final answer is 15 plus 10 times the square root of 2. So hopefully that makes sense. So I've got a couple more here for you to try. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so let me write this all out. I think the tricky thing with this one is now you have numbers on the outside and of the radical and on the inside, so you do have to be really careful with that. Now I will continue to do this in the longer way just so you can see all the detail. So I'll go ahead and multiply everything together first. Okay, so here's how everything looks when you multiply it together. So now let me simplify what I can. Okay, and so there's my final answer. So I'm kind of just speeding through some of the steps here. You can check your work against mine, but I think hopefully you kind of get some of the explanations with this at this point. Okay, so once again, I'm going to write this out. And now I'll show you what it looks like to multiply all this together. And now let me go ahead and set up any simplifications that I can. Okay, and so here's my final answer. And again, I've got all my work up here if you want to compare your answer to mine. Okay, so now I think we've got that idea. So now I just want to look at multiplying when you have higher roots. So here I've got a bunch of cube roots. So once again, let me just show you what would happen if you multiply all this together. Okay, so here's what I get. And I just want to give you a word of caution here. Be careful, now we're working with cube roots. So I've shown in other videos a list of square roots and cube roots and quartics and all that. And I've said this in other videos, but I want to just show you the list one more time. So sometimes when people are working with square roots and cube roots and fourth roots and all that stuff, they do tend, it's really common to just kind of get thrown off. So if you're working with square roots like we were in this one, so now you're looking for the square roots, and then when you switch to cube roots like we do here, this can just become a little disorienting. So sometimes having this list in front of you is very, very helpful. So if you don't have this list written down and you're struggling with this, you might want to have this in front of you just so that you can stare at it and be like, okay, I have moved on to cube roots. And so these are the things that you're looking to simplify. So just kind of a plug for that. So anyways, when I look at this, so the only thing I can simplify here is the cube root of 8. So my final answer will look like this. And so that's it. So now we have this last one here. So I'll go ahead and start multiplying this all out. And so once again, if I just think about working with cubes, I can only simplify this and this. So if I do that, then here's what my answer will look like. And so that's all you can do with this one. So you just want to keep all of those things straight. That can definitely be something tricky with this. Okay, so if this was helpful to you, please consider giving this video a like, or maybe giving me a comment with some feedback if there's something else you'd like to see. And also consider subscribing to this channel. I will see you guys next time.